Hello, welcome to another edition of HPA Global Insights. Today we are joined by our good friend Brian Negley, the U.S. representative for early data. Brian, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm baking here in Texas. It's I feel like a baked potato.
Well, we'll send you a big bag of ice.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, thank you. I'll build a swamp cooler. Um, so today we're going to talk about quarter two cross-border numbers. And before we get into that, of course, in the news we see China's economy is not doing well. It's not doing well. It's not doing well. All this stuff, and the housing market and all these different areas are not doing great. But this industry of health products or dietary supplements is doing quite well, as we will see today, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we will see, but yeah, it's holding up quite well. It's been doing well for a while, and pretty much through all the quarters, it's holding up quite well. So yeah.
All right. Well, that sounds good. Let's get into the quarter two numbers for cross-border e-commerce. All right. Just before Brian gets started, I just wanted to clarify something so he doesn't have to keep going back and forth or reminding people. He's going to talk about domestic e-commerce, and he's going to mention the word domestic and then cross-border e-commerce. These are two separate things. I think a lot of people understand that, but some people might not know. So when he talks about domestic, we're talking about the e-commerce entities like Tmall that are operating like Tmall.com, operating on a server and an environment that is based in mainland China. And cross-border typically is something like Tmall.hk or JD Global or something. And these typically, the servers for those platforms are a lot of times positioned in Hong Kong. So they're technically inside mainland China, of course, because Hong Kong is part of China. But in terms of internet and e-commerce, to keep them separate, that's how they designate them. So cross-border is going to be outside, and domestic will be inside. So with that, let's continue and have Brian give us all this great information.
Thank you for the introduction, Jeff. Welcome everybody. So as Jeff mentioned, we'll be looking at figures through Q2. Just as way of backdrop, we'll be looking at the health supplements market online. We measure it every month and we report figures. And so again, we'll be looking at numbers through June of 2023. Just a quick note on who we are. We provide a lot of solutions in the wellness area, health supplements, sales tracking. We also do prices, things like that. So we produce this series of data every month. Okay. Just things that Jeff, you and I just touched on. I just want to kind of briefly review just as backdrop for our listeners. Most of this, it's in the news, so people will know it. But China's economy, Jeff, as you alluded to, is not doing well. There is growth, but just not much of it. If you look at some of the growth numbers that have been published, there's a slight growth in Q2. A little bit of growth versus Q1. Yeah, it's expanded year on year, but last year was such a low base. And so there's a lot of discussion and discernment about what to do next. More money in the system, what to do about the property debts and things like that. And just a little bit closer to home and things affecting the companies that we cover. Obviously, we cover Alibaba. They've had a management change. Their chairman has been moved and he's heading, I believe now, cloud intelligence. And, they've got those 6 new business units. Daniel Zhang's doing that. Joe Tsai has come back as chairman. And then Eddie Wu was a chairman. He's going to be the new CEO. So they've got a shake up and a shuffle. Same thing in Jindong. The CEO was either he left or he was, pushed. It's hard to say which, but he's gone. And then their CFO, Sandy Wu, became CEO. But those are both recent. And then if you just look at share prices of 3 of the major companies that we cover, Alibaba, Jindong, Pinduoduo, they kind of had peaks back in 2021, and they've all had respective declines. So there is some sort of trouble at the top. But in the one category that we're covering, health supplements, like in the beginning, there's a fair amount of good news. So let's just jump into that. These are growth rates for the last year. So this is data from July 2022, June 23 versus the same period a year ago. And so on a sales value basis, The market's grown by close to 18% at 17.8. On a volume basis, it's also grown double digits, 15.7 year over year. So healthy growth throughout. If you break those numbers, that's 1 year versus the previous year. If you break those numbers into quarters and look at the last 4 quarters of the growth, you do see a soft Q3 back in last year. It's kind of flat or a little bit negative, depending on whether you're looking at value or volume. But in Q4 of last year, the health supplements market picks back up. And then the first 2 quarters of this year are really strong, as you can see. Q1, 28.6 on a value basis, to about 24% on a volume basis. Q2, pretty similar numbers. So overall strong market year on year. Some softening late last year, but it's really picked back up in the first half of this year. Okay. Then if you dive down deeper and look among our platforms to see who's doing well, who's not doing well, over that last year of growth, Jindong's grown a lot. Okay, so we're looking at sales values numbers for the blue is previous, is the last 12 months. The green is the previous 12 months. So that's year on year growth. So Jindong has grown 29% year on year, which is a little bit over the market. So they've done really well among the bigger players. Okay, as well as Pinduoduo domestic grown 60%. Taobao Global, not Taobao, but Taobao Global, it's grown 32%, and then VIP 50%. So those other 3 are smaller, but they've all grown substantially. So if we just look at share year on year. So now we're going to, we looked at growth year on year. Now we're going to look at shares year on year among all the platforms that we cover. Jindong has gained about 2 points. So they've grown faster than the markets, and actually their share will grow. So they've gone from 18.3 to 20.2. JD Worldwide, their cross-border counterparts flat. Both Tmall platforms are down year over year. You can see Tmall and Tmall Hong Kong both down in terms of share of the health supplements market going down. So some of the others, not much movement, and they're relatively small. Pinduoduo, we'd seen that they'd grown a lot, and their share correspondingly has gone up from 4.9 to 6.6. Okay. And then to take a quick look at manufacturers over that same period of time. Again, recent 12 months versus previous 12 months. The top players have done okay. H&H, by Health, they've grown double digits, but a little bit lower than the market, because remember, the market was mid double digits. Actually, among the top 10, it's some of those middle players that have done better. And then if you go all the way to the bottom, that's where you see big growth. Child Life and All Nature have grown substantially. Okay, so that was previous 12 months versus last 12 months versus the previous 12 months, where we kind of dissected 24 months of data. Now, early data added Douyin in June 2022. So we excluded Douyin from that 24 months of analysis because we wanted to have apples versus apples in our comparisons. I'm now going to look at the market over the past 13 months. That will give us 1 month of year-on-year growth in June of 2023 versus June of 2022. But Douyin is fairly significant, so we're trying to add them as much into our mix and our analysis as we can. So one thing is, we just look at the pie with Douyin, and this is looking at sales shares over the last 12 months, including Douyin. So the previous numbers excluded Douyin because we were looking at 24 months. So off the top, we can see that Douyin, the platforms combined, their domestic platform, which is that kind of yellow slice at the bottom, and then Douyin Global combined, cover about 18% of the market. So they are significant, not quite as big as the Jindong and Tmall platforms combined, but they're a clear number 3 player in the market. Okay. If you look at the last 13 months, domestic versus cross-border, and see how, all the domestic platforms combined are doing versus their cross-border counterparts. If you go back to, last year, it's pretty much a 60-40 split with domestic outselling cross-border. In the promotion periods, both in November and June, cross-border outsells domestic. So you see last year in November 2022, they almost converge. They become very close. But the interesting thing is, if you get into 2023, cross-border, the red line at the bottom, gains momentum. So they're gaining share versus domestic. So long story short, cross-border has been outperforming domestic platforms in 2023, especially in the June period. They come pretty close, 52-48%. Okay. If you look at growth June versus June, because again, now we're just looking at 13 months. So if you want to look at like for like June versus June, and split, kind of compare and contrast cross-border platforms versus domestic platforms on the left, the blue numbers are cross-border platform growth on growth numbers. So all the cross-border platforms grew June versus June. Pinduoduo Global, relatively small, grew a lot, but they all grew. Even the bigger ones. Tmall Hong Kong grew a lot. Taobao Global grew a lot. Jingdong Worldwide grew a lot. Their domestic counterparts in the red on the right, it's a mixed bag. The smaller ones, Pinduoduo and VIP, grew, but the bigger ones, JD and especially Tmall, did not do well. Taobao just a marginal 3%, and then Kala way down. So this just shows you, again, that the more recent trend of cross-border outperforming domestic platforms. Now I'm just going to look at the top 3 platforms and their share of market over the last 13 months, just to kind of drill down on that trend of both domestic and cross-border, and see who within those groups are doing well and not so well. So as mentioned, on a 12-month versus 12-month basis, JD, remember, is doing well. They gained share. However, if you look at the last 13 months, they've started to slip. So they kind of peaked mid last year, and they've been slipping ever since. They're that top green line. They've been going down. They started about 19.5%. Now they're like 15, 16% earlier in the year. They've gone up and down. They did have a good June. They go back up to 18, but they clearly declined. Okay. Tmall has been kind of up and down. They did surpass JD back earlier this year, but they've been kind of going sideways, not really up, not really down. And Douyin, there's a lot of up and down. The interesting thing is they don't peak in the promotional months. They're pretty much a non-promotional player, so they're kind of going sideways with a lot of up and down. Okay, so those are the top 3 domestic leaders. I then looked at the top 5 manufacturers on those 3 domestic leaders, just to see who are those top 5 on those respective platforms and how are they doing. So Tmall, there's some manufacturers that are growing a lot. Tongren is growing a lot. They have been growing a lot. They continue to grow year on year. By Health, on the other hand, and then who are down. Okay, JD is the middle platform. By Health, Tongren doing well. H&H not doing well. So it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of who's doing well, who's not doing well. Another point to note is the top manufacturers on Tmall and JD are almost the same. 4 out of the top 5 are the same, not quite the same order, but you've got the same players pretty much on the mix. If you go to Douyin, one point off the top is the top manufacturers are not the same. Yes, Tongren and By Health are on Tmall and JD, but they're number 4 and 5 respectively, and they're not growing as fast as some of the others. So Douyin's different, okay? And we've seen this before, but JD and Tmall often share common manufacturers. What they're doing, different promotions might be different. Items can be different, but a lot of the top players are basically the same. But in this case, Douyin, it's not. The top 3 players are different. And some of them are growing quite well. Okay. Now we look at the same thing cross-border. Okay, remember cross-border the last 13 months has done well, relatively speaking. Tmall Hong Kong is the one at the top. So one thing is, unlike the domestic market where JD is past Tmall, cross-border is not that's not the case. Tmall's maintained leadership. Point number 1. They're big promotional players. You can see they jump way up in November and June, and they've kind of grown a bit. That line's more or less sideways, but this year they've gone up a little bit, even those non-promotional periods. JDW is JD Worldwide. They've kind of gone sideways over the past 13 months, not up, not really down. Interestingly, Douyin Global, unlike their domestic counterpart that's kind of gone up and down, but basically sideways, they've grown. They started at about call that 5% the first couple of months in the 13-month run. They've gone up. They're getting close to double digits. So they've been part of that overall cross-border platform acceleration that we saw earlier. Okay. Same thing, we'll look at the top 5 manufacturers on Tmall, JD, and Douyin cross-border. Okay. So more growth here because, again, cross-border has been outgrowing domestic. So a lot of the manufacturers are doing better here than that chart we saw a couple of slides back. So H&H is doing well on Tmall, JBX as well. By Health is doing better on Jingdong Worldwide. Reckitt's doing really well on Jingdong Worldwide. So there are manufacturers that really grow out on both those platforms. They share 3 out of the top 5, Tmall, Hong Kong, and JDW. Same thing as we saw before. When you go to Douyin, it's a completely different mix. Top 3 are not even on Tmall and JDW, Jingdong's top 5 list. 1, and then 2, top 2 are growing triple digits. I think Heck is a collagen player. I'm not sure about Biwell, but again, it's a completely different mix on Douyin Global. Now I'm going to jump into some segments and just see what's been moving, particularly in the June period. Okay. So this is looking at, this is just breaking the market down in a different way, not by manufacturer, but by segments. Okay. So probiotic is the top segment. For anybody that follows market, probiotics been the top selling segment for a long time. It grew for a long time. It continues to grow, but not as much. In fact, just looking June versus June, it's down. It was down a little bit versus last year, -5%. Of the top 10, of the three that grew the most or the best or had the biggest impact on the overall June growth were calcium, the number two segment, grew 32.5%. DHA grew 57.5%, and then fish oil grew about 57%. So those three really drove the June growth. So I wanted to take a look at those. Okay. Looking at the top calcium segment, there's a number of kind of subs, there's kind of a number of sub segments within calcium. Bone, immunity, and everyday health are the top three, and they all grew. They all grew June versus June. They were the top performing segments, and they all grew. And you can see that top one, bone, they seem to do a lot of promotion. They grew also in November of last year. And then if you break that down a bit, you know, what calcium products did well in June, they're mainly products that were geared toward kids and seniors. Those two segments accounted for about 80% of overall calcium sales, and they both grew a lot. They drove the growth. And if you look at the number one product in June, it was that product on that product on the left. That's the product for kids. And then that number two product that also grew a lot in June was a senior product from Move Free. So again, senior calcium products targeted for seniors and children grew a lot in June. Okay. DHA sales, this is just the DHA sales trend. Again, it grew, the segment grew a lot in June. And you can see, you know, if you're just comparing those two numbers, it did go up quite a bit. Here, it was kids segments that grew a lot. Kids grew 67% year on year. These are the top three target user groups in DHA. So children grew 67%, infants grew 47%. Teenagers is kind of a distant third in terms of target group, but it grew a lot, 157%. But it's really kids products that drove the growth in DHA. There's just a couple of sample products at the bottom there. These are the number one and number two products in June of 2023. Fish oil was that third segment that had grown a lot. One thing to note is fish oil is more promotion sensitive. The overall category gets 25% of its sales in the two promotional months of June and November. So a quarter of the sales happen in two of the months for the overall category, which is a lot, but you would expect that given the size of those, the 618 and the 1111 promotions. Fish oil even more though. It's almost a third. It's over 30% of fish oil sales happen in those 2 months. It's very promotion driven, promotion sensitive. Okay. And here it's mainly products for seniors that grew. Products for brain health products that grew in fish oil over 70%. Okay, it's the top targeted group, but it grew the most. And the number one product for June was that Swiss wild fish oil product. Okay, and that's a little snapshot of their little marketing video. I assume that's a grandmother and granddaughter thinking about fish oil. So those three segments really grew the market. Again, not so much probiotics. They're still the top segment, but they didn't grow in June. Those other three that we covered grew the most. And with that, I'll wrap up. Okay, so one thing to note is despite all the issues we've talked about, you know, Jeff alluded to at the top, and I talked about it in my first slide, all the issues with the economy in China, online health supplements is very healthy. Okay. Year on year double-digit growth. And then if you look at, you know, Q1, Q2, if you break that last four quarters into last year into 4 quarters, particularly the first quarter, 2 quarters of this year grew a lot. Okay. If you just look at the last 13 months, because now we can throw Douyin into our analysis, JD did really well on a 12-month versus 12-month basis, but if you just look at the last 12 months, JD started to slip. Okay. Again, MAT basis, JD Pinot win, but last 12 months, it's really the cross-border platforms. Tmall Hong Kong has done well, Douyin Global, and then Taobao Global, smaller, but they've also done well. Looking at manufacturers, a lot of the top manufacturers grew on at least particular platforms. Looking over the last 13 months. H&H grew a lot on Tmall Hong Kong. By Health grew on both JD and Douyin. Tongue and Tongue, which has grown for a long time, even though it's not one of the top 2 or 3. They've been growing for a long time. They grow on both Tmall and Douyin. Okay. And just that last point again. Now that we're getting more of a view of Douyin, we're getting more of a sense of what they do, especially compared to Tmall and JD. They are different. They don't run promotions as offers. You don't see the big June and November bumps in either of those platforms. Number one. Number two, who they work with tends to be really different. So it's a point of note. Okay. And we took a look at segments just to say the same thing again. Probiotics slipped. It's a leading segment, but they did slip in June. However, that June growth was led by other platforms, namely calcium, DHA, and fish oil. And this particular segment, seniors in calcium, children calcium, children in DHA, and seniors in fish oil. Those were the target groups that led those particular 3 segments. So with that, I'll wrap. Again, healthy growth. There's a lot of growth out there. Over the last year, there's been some changes in who's growing and where it's growing, but overall, the category is quite healthy, especially relative to things going on in the China economy.
All right, Brian, thank you so much for that. That's some awesome news for us here in the supplement industry. And we'll see you again soon for Q3 in the near future to go over, and hopefully we'll still see some solid strength and growth.
Yeah. Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Jeff. Always look forward to speaking with you. It's a lot of fun, and it's always nice to report good numbers.
All right, cool. And then if anyone wants to get in touch with you at the end, we'll have your contact card so they can get in touch with you.
Perfect. That sounds great.
Okay. With that, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to HPA Global Insights. Please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues. Any questions or suggestions, email us at info@uschinahpa.org. This channel is operated by US China Health Products Association, which is a nonprofit organization. Please consider joining the association and supporting its global endeavors. Your support is very much appreciated. Until next time, take care.